take your seats. We have a very, very special program for you today, and we're really glad you're here. My name is Alex Stable. I'm the chair of psychiatry and the program director at Berkshire Medical Center. And on behalf of the coalition sponsoring the event, I'd like to welcome you today. The sponsors of Battlemind, Transitioning from Combat to Home, are Berkshire Medical Center, Berkshire NAMI, the Berkshire Coalition for Suicide Prevention, and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health's Suicide Prevention Program. So all of these organizations have contributed to bringing you the event today. I'd like to especially thank three people who've worked tirelessly to organize this for all of us on this special occasion. And that's Sarah Peroni, who may still be out at the front desk signing people in. Ken Quinn, Kathy, are you in here? Yeah, Kathy's up there walking down the aisle towards us. And Peggy Hope, who's been Peggy, you don't raise your hand so people know you. She's been a wonderful leader of suicide prevention in Berkshire County and across the Commonwealth. So we want to thank you for all you've done. Thank you for being here. I'm now going to turn this over to the mayor. One other thing, our public relations person mentioned that everybody should know there may be a legal reporter here, so things you may say might go on record in an article covering this important topic. But he said, make sure people know that. But just, you know, it's all good friendship and support of each other. So I'm going to turn this over. The mayor, Bianchi, is here, and he's going to introduce the event. Thank
you very much. And thank you for that warning about the eagle. If you're here, stand up. It's wonderful to see such a great crowd here. This is a very important topic. You know, certainly for those of us who served in the military, you know that it's a unique experience, and sometimes when you're going to do it, you don't really think it would be an honor, but indeed it is. And especially so today, because the folks who are serving in the military are not subjected to a draft, they all volunteer. And we have thousands and thousands of young people who put themselves in harm's way in places I'm sure many would choose not to be if they could. And I, for those of you who are inclined, as I am, I start my day by saying a prayer to keep them safe. And I also pray for those parents who have blue stars in their window, and especially for those who have gold stars. It's a great sacrifice, and I'm sure that there's a number of people who are serving or served in the military here today. Could I hear it? Yes. Thank you so much for your service. Greatly appreciated, and it is conditioned like never before. In that I was with General Rice yesterday, who's the head of the Massachusetts National Guard, and he talked about many medical units that have been deployed 2 and 3 times, and that's a significant burden. Because it oftentimes comes with a little warning, and it has a ripple effect with families. So this program is very important to help families, to help people transition. And we're very fortunate to have with us today from the Massachusetts Department of Veterans Services, Kevin Lambert. Kevin, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn this over to you.
Very much, Mr. Mayor, and everyone who organized this event. My name is Kevin Lambert. I work with the Massachusetts Department of Veterans Services. I'm also a disabled Iraq combat veteran. I served in the United States military. I joined the military in December of 2004. Within 3 weeks, by January 2005, I was sent to basic training. Shortly after basic training ended, about 2 weeks after that, I was sent up to Fairbanks, Alaska to join my unit. I had initially, when I joined the Army, asked them to send me to New York, Hawaii, or North Carolina, and they said, you'll get one of the three, ask your drill sergeant. As I asked my drill sergeant, I learned to never ask your drill sergeant for that again. And they sent me to Fairbanks, Alaska. So that was the start of my military career. Since leaving the military, and I'll do an overview of my military history and combat experience in a minute, I've been fortunate enough to get a job with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts working with the Department of Veterans Services. In this state, we are very fortunate that within the whole country, we are the leading state in the nation that takes care of our veterans, and it's been this way for hundreds of years. We have programs that no other state has, and again, we serve our veterans and their family members. The mayor mentioned that not only do we have to honor those veterans, but the Blue Star family members, especially the Gold Star family members. It's important that every day in between the parades and the ceremonies and all of that, that we're still honoring them and taking care of them. I'm proud to say that in this state, we are the only state to have a financial assistance program specifically for veterans and independents, Chapter 115. With that comes a veteran service officer in every single city and town, which no other state in this country has. There's 251 of them across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they're there to help you as community members, veterans, dependents of veterans to transition. And again, they oversee that financial assistance program. 5 years ago, when I got out of the military, I was with an infantry unit. I was a light dismounted machine gunner. I was getting out of the military, and I got offered a job with the state doing suicide prevention. So I went from training young soldiers to be willing to go over there and kill or be killed, to come home, and they told me, you're going to be a civilian and you're going to teach them how to not kill themselves. The whole thought process behind the SAVE program, our administration, the governor, lieutenant governor, realized that suicide was one of the biggest issues with our returning veterans, and the former speaker in the House had suicide hit home. His brother-in-law was a Vietnam combat veteran who completed suicide in 2006 after struggling for years and years after coming home from the war. So internally within the state, we decided we wanted to do something about this, and this is where the SAVE team came from. The Department of Public Health was tasked with doing suicide or providing suicide prevention services.
Excuse me, sir?
Yes.
I'm sorry, please forgive me. Please speak into the mic.
Yes, is this better? Okay, so 5 years ago, the Department of Public Health got tasked by the administration to provide suicide prevention services to our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans returning from war. This was before a lot of the media hype and big hype about suicide prevention, but we knew it was a problem. The Department of Public Health then came to the Department of Veteran Services and said, you know, we know suicide prevention, you know veterans, let's team up and try to see how we can stop this. So we started the SAVE program. It was a group of 4 young returning combat veterans and 1 spouse of a returning combat veteran, and we sat around a table trying to figure out what we could do more than just promote the use of the VA suicide prevention hotline. We had one of the greatest honors and privileges of meeting with the Lucy family. After a couple months of operating, we were dealing with a lot of high-risk cases, working with the police, a lot of clinical support to ensure we're getting these veterans to safety. We wanted to take a step back and see how could we prevent this before it gets to that. We had scheduled about an hour-and-a-half meeting with the father, mother, and sister of Corporal Jeffrey Lucy, which, for those of you who don't know, Corporal Lucy completed suicide in 2004 in Belchertown by hanging himself with a garden hose in his basement. We wanted to meet with them and try to see how could we have maybe done something different that could have had a different outcome. We planned, like I said, about an hour-and-a-half meeting, and 8 hours later, and 8 months later, they left our office. One of the biggest things they left us with was that if you meet the needs of the veteran and don't make the veteran meet the needs of the system, we believe you could have saved our son's life. So we took that to heart, and we really took a step back, and instead of just dealing with veterans in crisis, we dealt with all veterans and their family members and did a lot of advocacy. And we felt that whether you're preventing someone from going to jail through jail diversion, you're getting them money so that they can put food on their table for their wife and children, getting them detox services when they're highly addicted to drugs, or they're chronically homeless. By doing all of that, we're doing suicide prevention. And if we can prevent them from going down any of those roads, it's suicide prevention in the greatest way. Department of Public Health loved that, and 5 years later, we served well over 1,700 veterans and their families directly in the Commonwealth, and probably outreach to well over 30,000. So it's been a great honor and privilege to be a part of this team, and it's grown tremendously. Since having the SAVE team, again, this was all state funded. This was something we did at the state level. The VA was so impressed with what we were able to do in the peer-to-peer grassroots efforts that we had that they approached us and asked us to form a SAVE team for chronically homeless veterans. It's been just about a year since we've had that pilot going, and I can say that we've now housed 39 of the 50 we were assigned, and there's about 7 more of us being housed in the next couple of weeks. And because of the success we've had with that, now we've just announced that we're going to expand that statewide to help homeless veterans in every corner of the state access their benefits and services and get help to get safe, stable, and sober housing for themselves, to make that transition back from the military lifestyle to the civilian lifestyle. Going back to my history of military service, again, I joined in January of 2005 with the full expectations to go to war. Anyone who was joining in that time knew or should have known if you're joining, you're going to war. It was a real quick process to me. Again, I was off in basic training in January. By August of 2005, I was on a rooftop in Mosul, Iraq. And everything in between there was chaotic for not only me, but also for my wife, who was 19 years old, who had found out we're going to Alaska, and she quit going to school. She quit her job. She moved up to Alaska. They told us, oh, you'll be there for 3 years. Your unit's going to Iraq. You're not going. You're way too new. The day after we got there, they handed me a machine gun and said, good luck. You better learn that thing. So next thing you know, my wife was moving back home, and I was on my way to Iraq. And I stressed my wife so much because it's so important to recognize how stressful all of this experience is on not only the veteran, but also the family members. And that's not just wives, spouses, it's children, cousins, mothers, brothers, best friends, anyone involved with that veteran's life. This is a very stressful time for all of them. Shortly after arriving in Mosul, Iraq, we immediately started our operations. We were very fortunate. We were with the Stryker Brigade combat team. I don't have any pictures of Stryker with me, which is a mistake, but it's like a big tank on wheels, only it's half the weight. So it was a pretty efficient vehicle. Bombs that we would roll over would kill people in a Humvee, would barely wound one of us. So we were very lucky with the equipment, and we had the privilege of working with the 3rd Special Forces Group. So we were some of the best soldiers that America has to offer. We were in northern Iraq, up in Mosul. It was a different environment than the southern areas. We had a lot of friendly forces up there. We had the Kurdish. However, there was a lot of enemy, and there was a lot of action up there. We spent the first 6 months doing nonstop combat operations. If you weren't on an offensive mission, then you were out there just patrolling for 4 hours a day, and then you get 2 hours off and back for 4. There's no breaks when we were in the combat zone. After 6 months, they sent me home for 2 weeks, and then I was right back into northern Iraq in Mosul. In month 8, I had unfortunately taken a fall when we were dismounting. An enemy was shooting at us, and while we got off to go and get the guy, I fell off the back of the Stryker, which is only about a 3-foot fall. But because I was a dismounted machine gunner and carrying so much weight, the fall was a little harder for me, and I ended up breaking my L4 bilaterally. The lovely captain, who was a physician's assistant, told me I rolled my ankle and sprained my shoulder, and I said, yes, sir, and I moved on. After 2 days of light duty and a whole bunch of grunt candy, which is 800 milligram ibuprofen and water, I was back out on patrol and figured, you know, I have 3 months left, what's the big deal? We knew something was wrong, so they, what's that?
I saw it was just clear.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I thought someone could hear me, I'm sorry. So, month 8, I had broken my spine like that, figuring there was only 3 months left. I continued to do the operations and limited physical fitness in between. Most of the guys in my brigade were home. There was about a few hundred of us left over in Iraq doing the final handover to the next unit when we got woken up early. And similar to my first experience with the military here, I'm thinking, all right, they're going to send us home a few hours early, pretty sweet. They sent us in a plane, but we stopped in Baghdad. So we were woken up and told that in August of 2006, after 12 months of combat, being told we were going home. And now keep in mind, through all of this, my wife had sent her car, her couch, all her clothes. She was en route to Alaska. She had quit her job again. My father was already in Alaska to receive all that shipment stuff. The halls were rented for the parties. The families were ready to get us home. And we got woken up and told that we were going to be the initial push into Baghdad for the troop search. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning America time, and I had to call home and let my family know that. I called my mom. She started crying. I said, I can't deal with this. You've got to call my wife and tell her, and I hung up. And that was the last time they heard from me for probably 2 weeks. Why we moved down to Baghdad and started. We ended up being over there for an additional 4 months, doing non-stop operations, whether we were doing clearing houses. My unit was tasked with clearing over 90,000 houses throughout all of Baghdad. And then the last 2 months, my squad did sniper security for a sniper team that was tasked with eliminating an enemy threat a little bit north of Baghdad. Finally, after 16 months, we got sent home. I don't think we believed we were going to be home for good until we were getting out of the military, to tell you the truth. When I came home, that's when the real battle started. The combat was the easier part for me. I came home and everything started to fall apart. I was having trouble sleeping, I was having nightmares, I was having a lot of anxiety, I was really irritable, snapping at my wife over the littlest things, I was carrying a firearm everywhere I went. All of a sudden, the physical capability I had was dwindling daily considerably. I went from about 186 pounds to 140 pounds within the first couple months of being home due to stomach issues and stuff, so everything just immediately started to fall apart. And that's why I always try to encourage people that, you know, the combat was the easier part. Coming home was one of the most challenging transitions, not only for me, but also for my wife. As I was going into the military and telling them about all this pain, I had a colonel in the Army who was a supposed spine surgeon who told me that there is no real pain in my back and that it's all in my head, and the only way to get rid of the pain is to cut my head off. And we wonder why some veterans go home and end up making that decision. However, even though there was no pain, it was all in my head, he was filling 60 Percocets a week for me. So it was very contradicting. Nothing was going well. I was very fortunate that I was aware that our state had a Department of Veterans Services that was pretty powerful. I reached out to the former Secretary Kelly, who was an honor recipient. Within hours, himself, Senator Kennedy, and Senator Kerry called my base. The next day, that same colonel and sergeant major called me up there, and they were thanking me and calling me Kevin, and they magically found broken bones in my spine, and all of this stuff, getting the sugar for my coffee. You know, they flew me home to see the top spinal surgeon at Mass General Hospital, and that was great for me, but there was 3,800 other members of my brigade and millions of other soldiers and Marines and airmen going through the same thing I was, who didn't have access to these services, so I was very fortunate, and that's how I ended up getting involved with the advocacy program. And again, out of all that combat experience, that transition home, and still today, 5 years later, continues to be one of the toughest things and part of the whole military experience for both my wife and myself and the rest of my family. So the Battlemind training goes over the special mental health considerations for returning veterans, and a lot of what we do is talk about what stresses it causes and how it can both inappropriately and appropriately transition into civilian life skills. This is a picture of me while on one of those sniper missions in Baghdad, and when we first started giving this presentation, Battlemind was actually developed by the Walter Reed Institute of Army Research. In a tent in Kuwait in December of 2006, when I was coming home, some guy in a suit was up there presenting this to us, and I said, what schmuck in a suit is going to tell me how to transition? And I fell asleep, and here I am 5 years later, and I am that schmuck in a suit telling me how to transition. If I had only listened to him, I think my wife would have had a much better time in Alaska. You know, and when we first put this picture in, I would go with the clinician, and the clinician would give the majority of this presentation, and I would kind of chime in here and there. One day, on the way to give it to 150 social workers at the Solomon Carter Mental Health Village, she decided to hit a mail truck. With that, she was not allowed to leave, so the police came, the supervisors came, the report was filed, so she handed me a laptop and said, here you go, Kevin, you're doing the whole thing. I looked at her like she was crazier than me, but we did it, and the feedback we got was unbelievable. The clinicians, all of them, they've received numerous trainings on PTSD, what the signs and symptoms are, things like that, but no one's ever broke it down to them from a combat veteran's perspective on what it is the training that goes into us and how tough it can be to transition through that, and why certain behaviors happen. Not necessarily, again, that clinical reason why, but more from the veteran's perspective and why maybe, you know, yelling at the wife about that empty salt shaker when in all reality, your mind, you're perceiving that as your empty gun full of bullets that you should have had. Again, it's comparing little things like that and how we're trained to look at every single minor detail and make the biggest deal over the littlest deal because the littlest thing can get killed in combat. And actually back to the picture, I apologize. So why we use this picture again, when I first started giving this, I was 140 pounds, 186 pounds there. There was a notable difference in me. I can say I've gotten back up to that weight, probably over. Not in as healthy of a way, but we like to show this picture to encourage people, you know, I don't look the same I did then. And so when you come across that veteran who comes into the emergency room and he's been chronically homeless, addicted to crack or heroin, he weighs 100 pounds soaking wet, you know, don't treat them like your typical everyday street junkie. Treat them like that person who was willing to give their life so that we could live with the freedoms we have every day. And by giving that little bit of extra respect, we found that treatment will go a lot further and the reaction you get from that veteran will be a lot better. So the Battlemind, and again, I didn't go into the military with any thought process of what I was going to do. They built everything into me. A very intensive 6 months worth of 24 hours a day training that we had on top of everything else. And part of what they do is they teach you how to have your battle mind and be able to maintain your composure in combat under all the different circumstances. And the battle mind is the soldier's inner strength to face fear and adversity in combat with courage. They say that there's two key components to the battle mind and the training we get, and one of those being having self-confidence. You know that you can do anything out there, and you know, if there's any Marines in the room, I apologize, but in the Army we always used to say, there's no I in Army, so there's nothing that I could do. That self-confidence relied on your team, and whether you were the lowest ranking machine gunner or the highest ranking sergeant major, that job could not be done without you or anybody in between. There's something to that, and the confidence you have of not only yourself, but the men and women to the left and right of you, and then mental toughness. Having that mental toughness to be able to get through anything and everything. And without that, you'd never be able to get through some horrific things that happen in a combat environment. And under self-confidence, it's taking calculated risks and handling challenges that may arise through that risk. I always like to explain to people the calculated risk in combat compared to civilian life. You know, I come from Haverhill, Mass, so that's pretty far from here. Today I had to decide, you know, MapQuest said it was only 2 hours and 55 minutes, but I had to decide, you know, so do I leave at 8:30 and make sure I get there by 11:30 and be a little late? Or, you know, do I leave at 8 and give myself that extra time? And that was that calculated risk. And the outcome could be if it was late, well, so what? They can't stop without me, can't do saying on the way in. That's the calculated risk I have in my civilian life, and handling the challenge is I get a flat tire on the pipe. Well, guess what? I'm going to pull over. I'm not even getting out. I'm calling AAA and they're changing my tire. I'm signing the paper through the window. So, I mean, the challenges and what could happen is so much less severe when in combat you have to look at the calculated risk, where every time someone shot at us for a house, we were told to go kick down that door and go get the guy. That calculated risk was standing outside that door and kicking it down, knowing there's someone on the other side of that door with a gun that's going to want to kill you, or that house could very easily blow up. And that challenge that you have to handle is, oh crap, the guy just shot me or the house just blew up, and now you have to react to that. And having that mental toughness involves overcoming those obstacles and setbacks, and maintaining positive thoughts during times of adversity and challenge. And I always like to say it's crucial to have that during your combat experiences, but also think about all the things we go through with our family back home. My wife, at one point, the doctor told her she may have ovarian cancer. The Army was nice enough to send me a Red Cross message and tell me that your wife may have cancer and it's not looking, whatever the situation was, however, it wasn't enough to send me home. They said, even if you did have cancer, we're not going to be able to send you home. You had to be able to maintain those positive thoughts and not let that get the best of you, because the minute we left that base, if I was thinking about my wife and what was wrong with her, I just got the guy to the left and right of me killed. And that's not the way we can operate in combat. When we come home and we have that mentality, I promise you, your wife or husband would not like that type of reaction to something like that. But these are the way that they build our mind to be able to put things like that aside and focus at the task and the job at hand, and not let those outside things interfere with that. One thing I'll also disclose is that you'll hear me say guys a lot. I was with an infantry brigade. We had 3,800 members, and probably 3,750 were men, 50 women in support. But what I will say, add to that, is that women right now make up roughly 15% of our active duty force. Within 40 years, they're going to make up about 45% of our active duty force. Women are our fastest growing population of veterans out there, and they are facing a lot of the same challenges and battles that men are facing in combat. There are no more front lines. And they're not just playing that nurse role. There's women that are involved in very intense combat that have absolutely sacrificed their life for other people. They've been shot at and they have to shoot back. And sometimes they come home with even more unique issues and stigmas that they have to transition through in order to get the help that they really need. So again, although I'll use guys a lot, it's just because of my experience. Please keep in mind that this could also be for any woman who served in a combat zone, and that being a veteran and going through everything I've gone through, whether I went to combat or not, they trained me to have this battle mind. I developed my battle mind and continue to grow in that through the combat experience and utilizing it. Anybody who has served in the military is trained to do that and is signed up to give their life for anybody around them. So whether they went to combat or not went to combat, a lot of times they can exhibit the same behaviors. And with our housing program, we've realized that the higher majority of our chronically homeless veterans are actually peacetime veterans with high levels of mental illness and chronic mental illness. So it's not all whether you went to combat or not. Anyone who served in the military can come home and transition through all of these issues. So Battlemind skills helped us survive in combat, but will cause problems if not adapted when we get home. Battlemind checks is a great thing, and working with my therapist through the vet center I had, he helped me identify not only when help is needed for myself when I'm getting to that escalated point, but more importantly, how to ask for help. One of the biggest problems we have is young returning veterans coming home. I mean, we're guys, a lot of us are stubborn, thick-headed, but we're veterans, and the stigma that comes attached to it. I had no problem asking someone to run in a house knowing it was going to blow up with me in Iraq. Yet I can't call them at 2 in the morning from Pittsfield, Mass, saying I feel like I'm going to hurt myself. Can you bring me to the hospital? And sometimes, taking that different approach with the veterans and that peer-to-peer interaction can really destigmatize a lot of these issues. So each letter in Battlemind stands for a transitional issue, and the red is what our mind is trained like in combat, and on the black side it talks about how it can inappropriately transition back home. And we'll go through each of these slides during the presentation. In combat, buddies are cohesion versus withdrawal when coming home. And I always like to clarify the word buddy. In college terms and stuff, hey, he's my buddy, I went out drinking with him last weekend, he was a good kid. Your battle buddy in combat is somebody you never go anywhere without. Mine was Jimmy, he was from Texas, a border town down there, he was the other machine gunner. When I talked to my wife, he was there. When I went to the bathroom, he was there. When I took a shower, he was there. When we went to the shower hall, he was there. When I was getting shot at, he was there. That was my battle buddy. And the thing is, I knew that if a grenade landed between us, we were going to hit heads trying to jump on it and save each other's life. And at the same time, I also knew that tomorrow Jimmy could be gone, and I had to develop that same relationship with my next battle buddy. So it was a very confusing relationship. And a lot of times, we believe that no one understands our experience except our buddies who were there with us. And that can be a very true, statement when you're talking about your friends back home, especially when you look at being 23 years old and I'm over there for 6 months in combat, and when I come home to my 23-year-old buddies, all they want to do is drink and get drunk and look at the pictures of the people that we had to kill. Fast forward 10 months later to when I came home after 16 months, I had deleted all those pictures because I couldn't get them out of my own mind. Why would I want them on my computer? All my friends get mad at me and were yelling at me because I deleted them and didn't want to show them to them. They couldn't get that difference, and again, that different relationship where I know that if my buddy called on me in the military that I was going to be there life or death no matter what. My friend in civilian life, he calls me and he's drunk and he can't start his car at 2 in the morning at the bar, and I'm out there by 2:15 starting his car, and I leave my wife with no hesitation, yet on 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, it took him an hour and a half to get to me because the Patriots were on. So you have these different expectations, and it can really affect the way we transition and come home and have those relationships. And a lot of times we prefer to be with our battle buddies rather than spouses, family, friends, and avoid speaking about ourselves to friends and family. I will say that a lot of the experiences I'll share with you during this Battlemind, I've never shared with my family. My family had no clue a lot of what I had been through or what was going on until one day DPH did a webinar of the Battlemind, and my dad works for the state, so he got an email in his account saying, "Webinar Kevin Lambert," and he was kind of mad I didn't tell him about it. But he told everybody in the family, and they all watched it. Within 10 minutes, I got a call from like 5 family members saying, "Wow, we finally get you." I wasn't willing to share these things with my family. In my mind, I don't want to tell my sister that, I was willing to kill a little kid or an older lady if they were a threat when I'm the uncle to her little kid, to my nephew, or, my grandmother's in the room or anything like that. So I didn't want to share those things because it's a fear of how I perceive people would look at me. And it goes back to past stars like the Vietnam veterans. When they shared stories, get treated bad, spit on, and called horrible names. It doesn't happen this ever, although our perception can still stop us from sharing these experiences and talking about them. And a lot of time we end up bottling these things up until they're forced to come out of us in a very negative way sometimes. In transitioning this skill, it says combat results in bonds with fellow soldiers that'll last a lifetime. When back home, friends and families have changed, and reestablishing these bonds takes time and work. And we've also changed. And I feel I grew up probably 10 times quicker than all of my friends who didn't join the military and go through combat. But there is a way to kind of transition back into that friendship. And it can become very challenging. But again, there's services not only for family members, but also for siblings, cousins. The definition of a family member when it comes to counseling and services available for veterans loosens up a lot once you leave the DoD umbrella. When you're in the military, your family is your spouse and kids, and that's it. Outside of the military, you look at everybody involved in your lifestyle. And there's great programs like Home Base through Mass General Hospital who offer weekly groups and sessions for siblings, spouses, and cousins of veterans to help them understand how to better serve that veteran when coming home. The A stands for accountability versus controlling in combat. In combat, maintaining control of every single minor detail is essential for survival. And when I say every minor detail, I mean every single little thing. Being a dismounted machine gunner, I had 1,000 rounds. All those rounds were held together by a link. They all had to be in the link properly. They had to be clean. My weapon had to be clean. It had to be functional. We'd be going on patrol at 4:30 in the morning, and we'd be coming back at 9. The sun was already up. It's not going down in 4 hours, yet you'd have to have backup batteries for your night vision. Odds are you're not going to need them, but you bet your butt if you get stuck out there till past night in a firefight, you better have those night vision equipment. So every single little detail is trained in our minds, even those that you would think are so unimportant and valid for the situation. When we're coming home, a lot of times that transition is us not letting others share and making minor decisions, and a lot of times we try to control things that don't really matter and often overreact to very minor events. My wife will tell you that if we're driving on the highway and there's an accident on the other side and it's horrible, it's gruesome, I'm stopping, I'm jumping out of the car, I'm hopping the barriers with my cane, and I'm saving people's lives, and I'm doing great. Yet that salt shaker is empty on the table, and I'm flipping out and yelling like it's the end of the world. So sometimes for me, it's the chaos that I thrive on, but that calm and peaceful environment, and the little problems really can build up and become something much bigger in my mind. And not having control of a situation can be very challenging. And when I first came home, I have a sister-in-law, which most people have, and like most people, mine hates me. She spent 2 months in Alaska with me to learn how much she really hated me. And then we finally get home in the summer, my wife and her sister go hiking every year, mom and dad. So I decide now that I'm home, I'm going to take control of this, and I'm going to plan how they're going to get there, what car they're going to take, what road they're going to drive, what path they're going to climb, when they're going to check in. I packed their bags so that they had enough food for 3 days. I decided what route they were going to take home. I decided everything for the trip. And here's my poor little sister-in-law, wife saying, we just want to get away from this nut for 8 hours. And I couldn't let go of that little bit of control, knowing that the worst thing our mom and dad are going to do is sprain your ankle. Someone's going to come and save you. And again, with me not being able to let go of that control, and imagine what that did to my sister-in-law and wife's nice little hike. And magically, while she's hiking the mountain, she notices that every time she gets to this little clearing and the phone goes in service, Kevin's calling. Isn't that weird? And finally, the third time, she's like, are you just calling me nonstop? Because every time I get to service, you're calling. I could not stand the fact that we had no communication. Even though I knew she had checked in 15 minutes ago, in combat it was so crucial that you are always communicating, people know where you are, what you're doing, what's going on, and if you miss that 15-minute radio check, there is hell to pay, and there's a whole squad of quick reaction force coming out to make sure that you're all right. And for me, her missing that radio check was holy crap, so I have to call somebody to go search for her. When ultimately she was just hit and ignore on her phone. So again, we're overreacting to a lot of these minor events and trying to control things that absolutely don't matter in the civilian life, but in combat, all those details are important and are very crucial. Back home, it's important for us to know that the smaller details are no longer important, and family decisions and personal space is best shared. It's a lot easier to say that than it is to actually do that. Excuse me. So the T stands for targeted aggression versus inappropriate aggression. In combat, targeted aggression involves making split-second decisions that are lethal in a highly ambiguous environment. And this is what keeps our battle buddies and the soldiers alive. My main goal over there was to keep the guys to the left and right of me alive, and their goal was to keep me alive. I had no fear or worry about my own life. I always like to tell people that we resigned from life when we joined, and we don't really do that. I absolutely did not expect to make it home. And if I had that thought process of just making it home, although you always thought about being home and how great it's going to be to see your wife and your family, you also always knew that the very next day when you tie your boots, that may be the last time you ever tie them again. But you learn to live with that expectation that you could die tomorrow and it's okay. Coming home, a lot of times we may be easily irritated, get in a fight, heated arguments, assaults, spousal abuse, snapping at the kids, or even at your own leadership in the military. And when we were over there, we spent a large majority of the time off the base. We were always doing missions, patrols, out there. We take over houses for 3 days and stay in that house to try to catch bad guys. I mean, everything was pretty nonstop for us, but we always came back to the base. I mean, they tell us 4 hours, it'd be 4 days, they tell you 4 days, it'd be 2 months, whatever it was. You knew you were coming back eventually, and we were on the base, and I will say that I've seen a lot of people wounded and injured and even killed on a base. For us who spent most of the time in the city, being on the base was safety. We considered getting hit by a mortar round as like getting struck by lightning. The only thing we didn't think of is, nowhere is there a 16-month-long lightning storm. This was like a 16-month-long mortar storm. So your stakes had gone up, but to us, again, that was safety. And once we came back onto that base, we turned the switch off. We'd like to say like we had a little switch. As soon as we cross that wire, you turn it on, and you're the big bad machine gunner who will kill the 85-year-old lady or the 8-year-old boy if they're a threat, and everything in between it. And if you have any other thought process than that, you're going to get people around you and yourself killed. And then you come back to the base and turn the switch off, and I call my wife and mom, and I say, oh, everything's fine, I love you. And we were on a FOB, it's a forward operating base in FOB. I had a very thick accent then. My wife thought I was saying farm. So for the first 3 months, she was picturing like cattle fences and cows, and she thought I was on a farm. And after 3 months, we had been ambushed, and I lost a really close friend of mine and one of our great leaders. And I had to call her and tell her, Chris is dead, he got shot in the head, he won't be at dinner anymore. Her reaction to us having 12 Americans severely wounded and 2 killed was, wait a minute, you go into the city out there, what do you do? She had no clue what I was doing, and it was almost her way of not dealing with what was really going on over there, and it was me trying to keep her from having to deal with that. But then I'd hang up the phone, and we'd be getting mortared attack, and we'd be running out there to go get the guys who just attacked us 2 seconds later. And we had that ability to turn it on and off. And the problem is when we come home, they tell us to turn that switch off. There is no more threat. Well, for those of you who don't know, and in the slide it says transition in this in combat, the enemy is the target. When back home, there are no enemies. First off, you don't know who the enemy is, and that's the problem in Target. They're not, and in combat, excuse me, they're not wearing uniforms. They don't have a specific color, man dress on. There's no way to tell who's going to be shooting at you, and it's always, we felt like everyone we thought was going to be guilty who looked bad wasn't, and the people who weren't were the ones who were shooting at us the next day. And I'll use the example, 2 months or 2 weeks before we left our 16 months, one of the sergeants from Alpha Company was killed. The squad went walking into the courtyard, and we just used to go house to house and check on people and make sure there was nothing bad going on. The elderly guy in the courtyard offered him tea and a cigarette. His team leader walked past him to go in the house. As soon as he opened the door, he got shot 30 times by an AK-47 point blank, and he was just waiting there, and the old guy set us up. So you would have never thought the guy offering you chai and cigarettes in the courtyard was sending you in to be ambushed, but you never knew what was going to happen. You had to be ready to react to that, and then we come home, and we turn that switch off, and next thing you know, you find yourself, and I'm walking down Washington Street with my wife, and she's telling me, the greatest thing that happened. She just got this great job promotion. She's been working hard 4 years. She's got double the money coming in. 10 minutes later, I look at her and I said, huh? What are you talking about? Now, what does she think? Oh, I don't care about her. I'm a jerk. Everything's about me. When ultimately, that switch had been turned on by a noise that I heard, and now I'm watching every rooftop, every window, every person that walks by in combat. It was my responsibility as the rear machine gunner. Me and Jimmy were responsible for anybody coming up from behind. And if we let them through, we just let everybody at risk. And we had to decide when people were walking and driving by, are they a threat? Do they have a bomb? Do they have a gun? Are they going to kill us? Are they going to kill somebody else? Do they have partners on the rooftop? Do we have to shoot them? Do we not shoot them? Do we shoot out the tires? All that goes through your head in 2 seconds, and you have to make that split-second decision. And little did she know, as I went back to that, and what she saw as me not caring was really me trying to keep her alive because I perceived the threat, although there was no threat. It gets hard to control that switch when you let go of control of it. Tactical awareness versus hypervigilant. In combat, survival depends on us being aware at all times of our surroundings and reacting immediately to sudden changes. And when I talk about this, your environment is everything around you. And when we used to drive around in the Strikers, again, they were great vehicles. We were the last vehicle as well, so Jimmy and I would always be up in that hatch facing backwards. And any cars that came within 50 meters, it was our responsibility to stop that car or let it go if it wasn't a threat. But you had to make that decision, and you had to react instantly thinking about that. And the whole time you're paying attention to cars, rooftops, windows, people walking by you on the phone. What are they doing with their hands? Are they on the phone? You have to pay attention to everything around you. And at the same time, you're talking on the headset. Maybe you guys joking about the girl you dated in junior high school or something. And you're kind of flashing back to that. And next thing you know, a car drives into you. Everything's orange. There's smoke everywhere and rounds are hitting the side of your Striker. Your ears are ringing and you just got blown up. Now, my job inside that Striker, because I'm in the hatch, is not to duck down and hide. It's to stay there and defend the people that are down there and can't. And to fight back against that threat. So I have to react to that change, react to that sudden change, and react in an appropriate way where it's not, oh crap, I better duck. It's how do I stop these guys and keep the people safe below me? When a lot of times, because of that, when we come home, we may be easily startled, anxious. A lot of us have nightmares and consume alcohol or other drugs to help calm that down. With this era of veterans, we've noticed an ever-increasing use of opiates and the pain pills, and I think that's across the board. College kids, people across America. However, with our veterans, we've realized that a lot of them are being given by the military, similar to what I was. I was getting 60 Percocet a week, and when my wife told me I wasn't allowed to take them anymore because she didn't like not on them, never mind on them, I went and I told the captain at the pharmacy that I throw them out of the dumpster every time he gives them to me. He looked at me and said, that's a felony. You can't dispose of narcotics that way. I said, okay, can you not fill them, sir? He said, well, no, the colonel told me to fill them. I have to fill them, you have to take them. So now I'm leaving the base with 60 Percocets left in this situation where, do I give them to Jimmy because he's having trouble sleeping anyways? Do I sell them to the neighbor downstairs off post because I can make a few bucks? Do I flush them down the toilet and ruin Alaska's beautiful water system? Do I throw them in the dumpster and risk getting arrested? Well, I probably would have made one of those not so great choices, but my wife was there and fortunately reminded me that the dumpster in the parking lot of my apartment building was no different than the one on base, other than the fact that they wouldn't charge me for felony for throwing Percocets in them. So again, I had that support, but a lot of veterans don't, you take it. And what I was quickly realizing while I was taking it, although I had a lot of chronic pain issues, the Percocet was helping me with my mental pain more than the physical pain, and that's when it becomes an issue. And one of the guys that I have working for me who focuses on jail diversion, he ended up in jail 2.5 years ago because the VA had him on 4 Oxycontin 80s a day and took them from him one day. So he went out and got them himself and was doing all the behaviors to get them that any other drug addict would do, only the difference being he was a combat veteran and really suffering. We were able to divert that veteran from going into jail, and we got him into treatment. 18 months later, they dismissed all his charges because he completed not only the required 3 months, but an extra 15 months of treatment. I hired him a year ago, and now he works for the state to burden every veteran that we get a call about, and every judge. He had about 7 of them, who most of them told me this was hopeless and I'm wasting my time. He's gone back in front of every single judge now in a shirt and tie and a suit, and he's to burden other veterans. Sometimes we create these problems for them, so we have to help them through it. And transition on this combat skill, it says that combat requires alertness and sustained attention. When back home, it takes time to learn to relax, and that was one of the biggest challenges for me. When we come home, chaos is everything for us. Everything is chaotic when you're over there. There is no downtime. When you went into the marketplace and there was 100,000 people in there, yeah, somebody may take some pop shots at you. You're usually not getting an ambush. Nothing horrible is going to happen. The next day, we went back to that marketplace and there was 10 people in it. You could set your watch to 10 minutes and know you're being ambushed in between that and something bad's going to happen. So when it was quiet and relaxed, we were prepared for something bad to happen, and then I get sent home to Fairbanks, Alaska. The quietest and most relaxed place you could ever be. And I was expected to just be able to go and function there. And I remember renting a canoe with my wife, and we got maybe 25 feet out there, and my nerves hit. And I'm like, oh, I think we got to go back to the car. And she's like, oh, I don't know, why don't we just stay out? Meanwhile, I'm already paddling back to the car. I probably should have just told her we're going back to the car. And that was the end of our nice little nature ride out there in the canoe. And it was all because it was so quiet and peaceful that I just could not function during that. And it was a challenge for me to learn how to do that. And still to this day, my wife will tell you I love chaos. I absolutely hate being quiet. Or, we go camping every year for 10 days up at Moosehead. I have an agenda. Every single day, we're going to fish at 4:30, we're going to come back at 7:30, we're going to make breakfast, then we're going to do the laundry. She's looking at me like, are you nuts? Can't we just sleep in a tent? I'm like, yeah, but you got to do all this stuff, and you got to have a plan, or you're never going to get it done. She just wants to relax for once. I can't do that. So it becomes an extreme challenge. The next slide, the L stands for legally armed in combat versus locked and loaded when we come home. In combat, it is absolutely necessary and mandatory for us to carry weapons at all times. And I say that, I had a 23-pound machine gun. I carried that thing everywhere we went, and it was ready to go. You didn't go to the chow hall, to the bathroom, to the shower, around the corner to talk to your buddy. You had your weapon with you. And if you didn't, somebody around you could be killed. Even on the base, there was no safe spot on the base. We had guys try to climb over walls. We were always getting attacked. And you never knew when somebody else was going to need your help and you were going to have to run out there. And then fast forward again, 16 months, I come home and met the armory in Alaska, and they say, all right, give us your machine gun. What do you mean, you're taking my machine gun? They're like, yeah, you can't take it to your apartment in Alaska. Here I am, like, what am I going to do without my machine gun? So 5 minutes later, I walked into Fred Meyer's, and 10 minutes later, I walked out with a loaded pistol on my waistband. Again, I was in Fairbanks, Alaska. The gun laws are very limited there, I guess you would say. And again, being a person from Alaska, I walked out in 10 minutes with a loaded pistol on my waist, which was probably the worst thing that could have happened to me. And all of us were carrying weapons. I did not go anywhere without that weapon. I slept with it rigged to my bedpost. I didn't answer my door without it. I didn't go to the car without it. I didn't bring the trash out without it. There was nowhere I went without that gun. And my wife was going to the supermarket without me. She was bringing the gun with her, or I didn't think she was safe. My wife has never touched a gun before. Little 100-pound innocent little girl who, just tagging along with me through all this errand and handing her a gun. Oh, you better carry this. Well, I don't have a permit. Well, don't worry about it. Just carry it. And it was a very dangerous situation for me up there. And a lot of times we feel that we may need to have that weapon on us in our home or in car at all times, or that us and the world around us aren't safe. I never felt safe without it, no matter what. And I remember at 7 o'clock in the morning, the Fairbanks police knocked on my door on Sunday. They were looking for the girl who lived on the floor below us. And they knock, and they have that police knock, and they say, Fairbanks police. Well, I jump out of bed with my gun, and I answer the door with the gun in my hand. Now, if this was Boston, Massachusetts, I probably would have been shot or tackled or tased, or something bad would have happened. Fairbanks, the guy looked at me and said, can you just put that on the table while we talk? So the gun laws were different. Even traffic disputes, I would feel there was a threat, so I would have my gun in my hand. Now, in America, in Boston and any other state other than Alaska, if you have a gun in your hand in a Walmart parking lot, everyone is freaking out and screaming and calling the police and the SWAT team showing up. In Alaska, most people had a gun in there and getting out of their car because they were putting it on their waist or securing it under the seat or whatever they were doing. So again, a lot of my behaviors probably would have had me in jail in Boston. However, in Alaska, it was a little more free there. People didn't see half the things you did. When I was coming home, I knew my gun was illegal. So I said, all right, I'm not going to ship it, whatever. Mass told me not to. The soldiers show up to pack all my stuff, and they look at me and said, oh, what are you doing with your gun? I said, I'm just going to throw it in the river or the dumpster, destroy it, whatever. He goes, oh, why don't you just send it home? I said, well, it's illegal in Massachusetts. They said, I don't have a permit, blah, blah, blah. So what? we're gonna stick it in a box, deal with it when you get home. So I'm sitting there like, absolutely, pretty sweet, all right. Now my wife's in the background. Now the whole time we were in Alaska, every time she wanted me to go to therapy or stop taking the painkillers, she threatened that she'd leave and go home if I didn't do it. So of course I did it. This time she said, if you take the gun home, you're not taking me home. So first thing I'm thinking is, all right, I'd rather have a gun than my wife, because I feel safer. Luckily, the kind of smartened me up a little bit, and I left that gun behind in Alaska. We destroyed it. Best thing ever. We recently, one of my first diversion cases, not recent, a few years ago, was a TSA bomb appraisal expert. He was a gunny master sergeant. He had done 3 combat tours. When he left Hawaii, somebody told him the same thing. He took his gun. Didn't have any problems for a while being home. However, what we didn't know is every night he was roaming his house with a gun, checking every window, checking every door. He got drunk one day during a barbecue, and his childhood friend and him got in a little fight. He decided 10 minutes later to walk down the street and tell him if he does that again, I'm going to shoot you in your foot. I can't tell you how many times I took Jimmy and shoot him in his foot. He would shut up. Again, in the combat zone, there were bullets everywhere, grenades. I mean, it was almost like one of those things that's okay to say to somebody, unless you were really going to do it, I guess. However, in that civilian world, although that friend didn't care and knew, and he did not have his gun in his hand, he had it on his waist. An elderly neighbor heard this happen and saw a gun on his waistband. She called the police, and now this gunny master sergeant, who is a TSA bomb appraisal expert, he is training the guys at the gates to see signs of somebody walking through with explosives, is now arrested and facing 2 minimum mandatory sentences of 18 months because he had an unregistered weapon and no permit to conceal. That's 36 months in jail that he was supposed to serve. He could not serve those sentences together. He had to serve one after another. Fortunately, we were able to get involved and help, and not that we're asking that any veteran, I'm not going to say, oh, he's an Iraq vet. It's not a problem with the store. We're not diverting them from prosecution. We're diverting them from incarceration. We were able to divert him from jail for the most part. He was looking at 3 years in jail. He got 6 months in jail on the weekends. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this. They used to do this in the 70s for drunk drivers, as the judge showed us. This way, drunk drivers would learn their lesson, but they could still support their family. This gunny sergeant was an absolute, never had a history of criminal service, or criminal history, or anything like that. He had a newborn baby on the way, had a 2-year-old at home. His wife was stressing out. That weekend in jail, I'm not sure how long the sheriff made him check in or didn't make him check in for. We weren't really caring about that. But this made him be able to keep a job, support his family, not lose out on 36 months. And now he has another job and is doing absolutely good in life. He's not a bomb appraisal expert. Maybe he shouldn't have been at that point making those decisions. But again, he was going to jail for 36 months for something that the Army, who when the Army tells you something, you do it, and that's it, told him it was okay to do. Yet when he came home, the police didn't agree with that, and guess what? The police won. The Marines didn't back him up once he was back home. And then when we come home, it's important for us to know that it's dangerous to be unarmed, or it's dangerous to be, in combat it's dangerous to be unarmed, when at home it's very dangerous to be armed. Again, veterans have some of the most discipline with their firearms. I pointed a loaded machine gun at tens of thousands of people that I could have killed and no one would have questioned. We didn't do that because that wasn't our goal in there, and that's not my fear, is that I'm going to come home and have a gun and just go crazy and start shooting people. My fear is those nights when I'm having a flashback and my wife wakes me up and I'm not really awake, and all of a sudden I see her, but in my dream I'm fighting Al-Qaeda, and I grab that gun that's right next to my head and it's loaded, and I shoot before I think of anything else. The next thing I wake up, and once my wife's dead, I'm going to jail, and who's going to really believe that I was in a flashback? Or the fact, someone bangs on your door at 1 o'clock in the morning because your house is on fire. I wake up to someone banging on my door, I might just grab my gun and shoot. And this poor neighbor was just trying to help me. So sometimes we overreact to minor events. If we perceive a threat that's not really there, once we perceive a threat, we're taught to eliminate that threat. And if you have your firearm at the ready and it's loaded, you're not going to have that chance to not think about it. It's very hard to tell a veteran that just carried a weapon for 8 months, 16 months, 2 years that they're not allowed to. There's safe ways for veterans to have firearms. If they're going to tell you it's for hunting and target shooting, well then why is it zip tied to your bed, fully loaded with one in your chamber? Why don't you take your magazines and put it at mom's house, with the bullets at your sister's house, and keep the gun at your house? Now if they do get that thought of that point of hopelessness, or they want to overreact, they have time to think. And if they don't have time to think, hopefully one of their family members will notice something's a little off and maybe not give it to them. There are ways around all of this, and I will say that I know several police officers that are service-connected for PTSD, the best police officers on the force. So none of this is a blanket statement, and several veterans can come home and have minimal transitional issues and be very successful owning firearms in other situations. The E stands for emotional control versus anger and detachment. In combat, controlling emotions during combat is critical for mission success. Every emotion, whether it's laughter, happiness, anger, sadness, fear, anxiety, all of that, you have to control that. And you have these emotions during combat, but again, you learn how to regulate them and not show them. And when we come home, a lot of times failing to display these emotions or only showing anger around family and friends will damage our relationship. And a lot of times we can be seen as detached and uncaring. And when we talk about controlling emotions in combat, it's from the extremes to the lows. And whether your best friend just got killed right next to you, your job is to step over here and eliminate that enemy threat and then deal with your friend afterwards. And you know what, you have minimal time to deal with that, and then you're back out on mission. Or like I said, if your wife or your child has this risk or threat of something, illness back home, and they're gonna call and tell you, but you can't go home, and 5 minutes later you're gonna be on patrol, you can't be thinking about that. You have to be thinking about your mission at hand. Again, if my wife knew after I got that call I was out on patrol 20 minutes later and could have cared less about any of that, she would have been devastated. But she wouldn't have got that. Without that, I would have been dead. And in combat, again, when these things happen, you have limited time to show these emotions. You train to not show them. On November 19th of 2005, we were 3 months into combat, and we were kicking butt and taking names and kicking more butt. We had minimal injuries, and finally we were ambushed. We were set up at 4 o'clock in the morning by the Iraqi police. They called us to a house and said that they were being fired at. By the time 2nd Platoon got out there, the Iraqi police were firing at us as the Americans. There was an Al-Qaeda stronghold that was in this house. There was over 7 terrorists inside. There was 4 men, a woman, and there were some children. All of them were guilty in shooting. As 2nd Platoon entered the courtyard, they started to get a machine gun fire, and they had great mortar rounds as grenades, so they were dropping them on them. Some of our guys were getting shot in the courtyard. Another squad went into a kitchen, which had kind of 2 doorways at opposite corners. There was about 6 of them inside that were just getting sprayed with bullets nonstop. We were 100% set up and ambushed, and during all of this, we had to control our emotions. 4th Platoon had called in for some help, or excuse me, 2nd Platoon had called for some help. My platoon had just gotten back like 20 minutes ago from a 4-day mission. We had just taken off our clothes, got ready for bed, and next thing you know, all we got heard was screaming that 2nd Platoon was taking mass casualty, and we gotta go. Within 11 minutes, we were on scene with all our strikers and all our gear and ready to go on the whole ride out there. All you could hear is all your friends yelling and screaming and bullets and bombs going off. And I mean, these are screams that you'll never hear anywhere else. And you'll never forget. And during that ride, you have to control those emotions and that fear, because if you go out there and you are not mentally set for that, you are going to get yourself or somebody else killed. As we got out there, we were starting to evac the guys who were wounded. My friend Joseph had walked out on his own. He got shot 26 times. 20 of them were stopped by his gear. The other 6 penetrated his legs, arms, and stomach. Sergeant Landis got shot underneath his eye, and he's still alive today with an AK bullet in his brain. Sergeant Lara had gone around the counter to shoot the enemy, and a bullet ricocheted off his gun and went through his mouth, shattering all of his teeth, and came out the other side. As we got them out of there, one of my good friends, Chris Alcozer, who would come to the unit with me, was in basic training at the same time. My wife knew his fiance over the phone. You know, 2 days before this ambush, Chris was home and got engaged to his young fiance. 2 days later, he was in the most intense combat situation. He was in the courtyard throughout this whole thing. He was shot once in the stomach, and he was laying cover fire to save everybody else. As we told him to go and get on the truck to get help, and was my squad was pulling up, when he turned to walk away, he got shot in the back of the head and killed by a terrorist with just one of those lucky shots. As he went down, he died instantly. Sanford ran off the truck to go and help him. He was a medic before the military, so his first instinct was to get down and try to revive him. He got shot in the hip and threw a small artery and came out his butt. He died twice on the way to the emergency room, we were told, and once at the cache, and they were able to bring him back to life. And then they left, our squad was there, we watched the helicopter shoot up the house, and then my squad was told that you were going to assault the house. There was 5 of us on the ground, and we all looked at each other and said, we are not coming out of this house. Without hesitation, every one of us ran down those stairs. As we got to the doorway of the house to go and invade it, Master Sergeant Yost from the Special Forces group said, absolutely not, I'm taking the Iraqis in. For those of you who don't know, the Special Forces were there to train and advise the Iraqi troops. They were not there to fight with them. He not only fought with them, he led those troops into there as it was their country. We got up to the rooftop to full security. As they started going in, the Master Sergeant led the way, and all the Iraqi army hesitated. Everybody knew there was something wrong with this house. They started getting picked off in the courtyard by one of the terrorists who was around the corner. As soon as enough of them entered the house behind Master Sergeant Yost, the house flew sky high. Through all of this time, you know, we're up there on the roof, we're being told this, you're going to go down there, you're controlling your emotions through all of this. And after the house blew up, our initial thought was, crap, we got to go get those guys out of here. All in all, that day there was 12 Americans seriously wounded. There was 2 of them killed. We had 16 Iraqi army that were 16 of them that were killed, and about 33 of them seriously wounded. After that house blew up, it was our job to go and pull all of them out, to put terrorist bodies over here, to take the friendly bodies out. My poor medic, who was 22 years old, all those 30-something wounded Iraqis, he had to decide which one do I treat. I have 5 morphine shots. He's burnt to a crisp. He's not going to live, but he's still alive, and had to determine who do you give care to, who's most likely to take it. And he's 22 years old, having to make these decisions on his own while we're pulling more and more bodies to him. During all of this, the emotional control, this day lasted 14 hours. The fight was maybe only 40 minutes or at most. That day lasted 14 hours, pulling bodies out. At the very end of the day, my commander came up and asked for 2 volunteers. Me and Jimmy, the good privates we raised our hand, yes sir. We were tasked with searching the body bags. So that meant the full bodies, the body pieces. You had to go through every article of clothing, go through the shoes, look for little SIM cards, little maps, intel, anything like that. And I tell you, to this day, when I talk to Jimmy, that's still something that bothers him. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees it. He smells certain smells, you smell it. But when we were over there during that time, he was laughing and joking. He joked about the physique of the woman who was killed in the house. He waved with an arm or somebody that wasn't attached. And it was like his way of getting through that time and trying to control his emotions. But when we come home, those emotions can sometimes get the best of us. But again, while you're in that combat experience, you can't show any of those emotions. And for those 2 men who were killed, again, Chris was a good friend and Tony was a great leader. We weren't allowed to show emotions that day. You had to stay and fight, knowing that that's what had just happened. You had to stay and continue to fight that fight. You got that 1 hour during the memorial service to say goodbye. You send their bodies off on a flight line, and then you all go in an auditorium and you say your goodbyes. And it was 220 special forces operatives from around the country there. There was probably 1,000 of us infantry guys and several hundred Iraqi army soldiers. I don't think there was one person that had guy eyes in that room. However, 2 hours before that, I was in, my lead vehicle was blown up. I was going back for it, and several hours afterwards, we were in a small engagement out in the community right afterwards. So there was no real time to grieve, and then we come home and we have to grieve about it. And again, when all that happened, we were all willing to do the same thing that day. Only some of us got called on, okay, that ultimate sacrifice. We see each other as soldiers, and that was our job, and that's what we're willing to do. It was when we came home that it got the best of us, and all of a sudden, I Google search Master Sergeant Yost, and you'll see a guest book. He was 22 years in, he was a special forces operative, he was one of the world-renowned weapons instructors. All those things we knew. What we didn't know is he was going to retire about a month after he was going home. He was going home on December 29th, this was November 19th. He was a father to a 16-year-old girl who wrote in that post, and Daddy, I just wish you were here to hug me and tell me that you love me. So now it took him from being this big, bad, Green Beret Special Forces guy to now he's a daddy. Imagine the difference in that, and now I have to deal with the fact that I was supposed to go into that house. I was willing to go into that house. He made that choice. It's all split-second decisions. You move 2 feet this way, and the guy gets killed that moves 2 feet this way with you. You can't control any of those things. But it can become very challenging when we come home to deal with all of that. And we wonder why we're afraid to not have our weapons on us when we're at home. And all of this can happen. And then that emotional control that can be seen is attached and uncaring. In combat, it says controlling emotions is necessary. When at home, limited emotion leads to relationship failures. Again, I couldn't show those emotions in combat. It was forced into me and beat it in my head that you'll get someone killed. No one told me when I'm on the couch at home with my wife, I have to show those emotions and those affections, or she's going to think I don't care. What happens after 5 years of not showing those emotions? Your wife not thinking you don't care? She's probably not doing good in that relationship. So it became very challenging until we got that help that we needed. That not only could I start to work on showing those emotions, but my wife could really understand that, maybe it's not you, and maybe it's him. Because I'm never going to tell her that it's me. I always tell her she's the crazy one. And the fact is maybe it's really me. And kind of to take we're about to go on to the next word. I just want to do a time check to see how much more time do we have?
Until 20:30.
Oh, we do? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time. So part of the emotions and stuff, so everyone sees the dog here with me. Usually she kind of walks around. Today she's a little sleepy and there's no food up there, I'm sure. She'd be up there. So Ronnie was actually one of the first dogs in the state trained for combat veterans with PTSD. NEEDS is an organization. They've been training dogs for deaf and disabled Americans for 35 years. In 2006, they started a program, K9 for combat veterans. When I came home utilizing a cane with a spine injury, they wanted to give me this beautiful black lab to use instead of a cane. I used this dog, it'd be my assistant dog, I could walk with it. I said, absolutely not. I'm going to be off this cane in a year. So I still have the cane. But that was my thought process. And I said, if the dog is my cane, I'm never going to want to get rid of it. So the lady who was in charge then told me, oh, we'll have dogs for vets with PTSD, and you're going to take one. I said, yeah, I'll take one if you ever get it. I didn't think she was going to get it. A year and a half later, she calls me and says, hey, guess what? We got the grant approved from DOD, and you're going to be our first candidate. I couldn't say no at that point, although part of me wanted to say no. Even at that point, my wife kind of wanted to say no. Now she would never say any of that. Ronnie was put through the same training all their dogs go through. They go through 12 months in prison with somebody. They go, the first 8 weeks is at the puppy house. They go to prison for 12 months. They work with the foster parent. Ronnie had a lot of advanced training, and they really picked their A++ dogs, which how they say it. All the needs dogs are great, but they really took a lot of the labs with the perfect demeanor and temperament to help combat veterans with PTSD, and it was all a research study by Department of Defense. I can say that since then they've done 16 dogs under the research study, and last March they officially launched it as a program where, for free for any combat veteran with PTSD, that they'll offer you a dog under the Trauma Alert program. Or veterans with balance issues and stuff can get dogs to help with that. Ronnie helps with not only the PTSD, she can pick my cane up when I drop it, she picks the keys up, she can go and turn on lights for me, she can open the refrigerator, get something on and close the refrigerator. I always tell with the limited emotions when I don't want to show my wife this affection, I just send Ronnie a little bit, tell her. And when my wife's not around, I always joke that if needs could take my wife for a year and a half and do what they did with Ronnie with her, our relationship would be much better because Ronnie can deal with me more than 8 hours a day, no one else can. But it's been one of the greatest changes, and again, it took a lot for me to accept this as a change and bring the dog everywhere, but I figured, you know, it's either this or a pill and a psychiatrist.